My son told me I should be grateful to live in his house for free. He said it over a Thanksgiving dinner that I had bought and cooked. He thought my love was a free service, and my lifetime of sacrifice was worthless. He didn't know that I, his freeloader mother, was a retired bookkeeper who had kept a record of every single penny I had given him since the day he turned 18. Before I begin, thank you for being here, for being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, you are in the right place. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. My name is Aaliyah, and I have the honor of narrating the story of a beautiful, resilient woman. Now, let me tell you what they did to her. Let's start. My name is Beatrice Holloway, and at 70 years old, I had become the silent, invisible pillar holding up my son's beautiful, fraudulent life. I live with him and his wife, Tiffany, in a magnificent historic home in Ansley Park, Atlanta, a neighborhood of old money and even older trees. To their friends, to their colleagues, to the entire world, my son Marcus is a testament to his own genius. A brilliant entrepreneur whose success is a testament to his own genius. They see the expensive cars, the lavish parties, the European vacations. They do not see me, the quiet old woman in the guest room, the secret benefactor, the woman whose life savings are the foundation upon which their entire world is built. My life has been one of quiet, methodical sacrifice. After my husband passed, I poured everything I had into our only son, Marcus. My love for him was a vast, boundless thing, and my greatest desire was to give him the opportunities I never had. The first and largest of these sacrifices came when he was accepted into Morehouse College. He was so brilliant, so full of promise, but the tuition was a mountain we couldn't possibly climb on our own. I remember the day we sat in the cold, impersonal office of a loan officer at the bank, the air thick with the smell of old paper and quiet desperation. The loan officer, a man with a practiced, weary smile, looked at our financial statements with a sympathetic sigh. "Mrs. Holloway," he'd said, "a loan of this magnitude, it will require significant collateral. Your home is your only real asset. You would have to take out a second mortgage. The terms would be stringent." "Is it popular? What's the term?" I remember the weight of that decision, a physical pressure in my chest. My home, the one my husband and I had worked so hard for, was my only security. To risk it felt like risking my very soul. But then I looked at Marcus, at his face, so full of a fierce, hopeful intelligence, and I saw not just my son, but the future of our family. I saw a Morehouse man. With a hand that trembled only slightly, I took the pen and signed the papers, the ink a dark, permanent testament to my choice. As we walked out of that bank, the weight of the new debt a heavy cloak on my shoulders, Marcus had hugged me, his own eyes shining with tears. "I won't let you down, Mama," he'd promised. "I'll make you proud." He graduated with honors, and I quietly, diligently paid off that loan for the next 15 years, long after he had forgotten the sacrifice it represented. A few years later, he came to me with another dream. The tech boom of the early 2000s was in full swing, and Marcus, now in his late 20s, had a brilliant idea for a startup. He spoke with a passion I hadn't seen since his college days. His words a torrent of innovation, of changing the world, of building an empire. He sat in my small living room, his energy so large it seemed to fill the entire space, and he laid out his vision. "Mama," he'd said, his eyes shining, "this isn't just a business. It's a revolution, but I need seed money, an initial investment to get the dream off the ground." I believed in him. I saw in him the same fire, the same ambition that had driven his grandfather. So I did what I had always done. I took a significant portion of my own retirement savings, the money my husband and I had so carefully squirreled away for our own golden years, and I gave it to him. "This is your chance, son," I'd said, handing him the check, my own hands surprisingly steady. "Make me proud." The business, a victim of his ambition and his inexperience, failed spectacularly within a year. He was devastated. On the brink of bankruptcy, I did not say, "I told you so." I simply, quietly paid off his debts, absorbing the loss, another invisible sacrifice, to protect my son from the consequences of his own failures. When he married Tiffany, a woman whose taste was as expensive as her ambition, I knew they would need help. They found their dream home, the beautiful historic house in Ansley Park. It was far beyond their means, but I, wanting to see them happy, wanting to be close to my future grandchildren, made another sacrifice. I gave them the down payment, a life-altering sum that represented the last of my significant liquid assets. And for years, I continued to be their silent financial pillar, quietly paying the property taxes on their grand home, a bill they seemed to conveniently forget was due every single year. I did all of this out of love, a deep, profound, and perhaps foolishly unconditional love. I always hoped that each bailout, each gift would be the last one, the one that would finally give Marcus the stability he so desperately craved, the stability he so expertly pretended to have. Now I lived with them. After a small health scare last year, they had insisted it was for the best. "We need to keep an eye on you," Mom, Marcus had said, his voice full of a concern that now, in retrospect, feels chillingly false. So I moved into their guest room, a silent observer in a life I had funded. And I began to realize that in their eyes, I was not their benefactor. I was their burden. And my lifetime of sacrifice was about to be repaid with the cruelest, most humiliating form of ingratitude imaginable. The Thanksgiving dinner was meant to be a showcase. Marcus had just, by some miracle of charm and creative accounting, secured a new line of credit for another of his ventures, and he and Tiffany were in a celebratory, almost manic mood. They had invited a dozen of their most important friends, people whose approval they so desperately craved. My house, was filled with the sounds of their success. The clinking of expensive wine glasses, the smooth melody of a jazz playlist, the loud, self-congratulatory laughter of people who lived on a different planet than I did. I spent 2 full days preparing the meal. A magnificent 20-pound turkey roasted to a perfect golden brown, creamy mashed potatoes rich with butter and cream, my famous cornbread dressing, a recipe passed down from my own grandmother, and the dinner rolls, the ones I had baked from scratch that very morning, their warm, yeasty aroma filling the house with the only genuine note of love in the entire affair. I was, as usual, expected to be a silent, efficient part of the catering staff. I helped serve the guests, I refilled wine glasses, I made sure everyone had what they needed, all with a quiet, polite smile on my face. I was the ghost at their feast, the invisible engine making their perfect party run smoothly. When everyone was finally served, I made a small plate for myself and sat down at the far end of the long, elegant dining table, hoping to eat in quiet, unnoticed peace. The conversation around the table was a torrent of a language I didn't understand. They spoke of stock options, of capital gains, of their recent trips to Europe, their winter plans for Aspen. Marcus, at the head of the table, was holding court, his voice booming, his laughter loud, a man performing the role of a self-made titan of industry. He was stressed, I could tell. A new debt, a new venture, another turn on the frantic hamster wheel of his financial life. His joviality was brittle, his eyes holding a flicker of something sharp and anxious. And his stress, as it always did, was looking for a target. Tiffany, his wife, seemed to be subtly goading him. "Marcus, darling," she'd said, her voice a little too loud, "tell everyone about the new property taxes. It's just criminal what the city is charging these days. The costs of maintaining a home like this are just astronomical." She looked at me for a split second, a flicker of something cold in her eyes. She was setting the stage. They found me. I had just finished my small first helping and reached for one of the dinner rolls I had so lovingly baked, a small, simple comfort. And that's when it happened. Marcus, my son, saw my hand reach for the basket. His laughter cut off abruptly. He slammed his own hand down on the table, the sharp, violent sound making the silverware jump, the wine glasses tremble. A sudden, shocked silence fell over the room. Every eye turned to him, then to me. He looked at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt, his eyes cold and hard. In front of his wife, in front of his children, in front of a dozen of his most important friends, he sneered, his voice a low, vicious growl that cut through the silent room. "You live here for free, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with a cruel, transactional disdain. "Be grateful for what you get." The words hung in the air, a monstrous, unforgivable indictment. He had taken my lifetime of sacrifice, my love, my very presence in the home I had helped him buy, and had reduced it to a single ugly word: freeloader. A beggar at my own table who had to be grateful for the scraps she was given. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing wave that washed over me. From the tips of my toes to the roots of my hair, I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked around the table at the shocked, uncomfortable faces of his guests who were now all staring at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I saw one woman, a friend of Tiffany's, quickly look away, a flush of embarrassment on her own cheeks. I looked at my grandchildren, their own small faces a mirror of confusion and hurt. And I looked at Tiffany, who just took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on her plate, a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. Her silence was a roar of approval. I slowly, deliberately withdrew my hand from the bread basket. I looked at my son, at the stranger who wore his face, and I saw him for what he truly was. A weak, pathetic man, so consumed by his own failures that he had to lash out at the one person in the world who had only ever shown him love. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm, the kind that precedes a terrible, cleansing storm, settled over me. I stood up, my movements slow, steady. "You are right, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but imbued with a new, chilling authority that made him flinch. "I have been living here for free for far too long, and it is high time I started paying my way." I turned and walked out of the dining room, my back ramrod straight, my head held high, leaving them all to stare after me in a stunned, uncomfortable silence. I did not go to my room to weep. I went to my old home office, the one in the back of the house they never entered, the one where I kept my records. The heartbroken mother was gone. The quiet, accommodating woman had vanished. In her place was a bookkeeper who was about to conduct the most thorough, the most devastating, the most long overdue audit of her entire life. The night after the Thanksgiving humiliation was the longest and most productive of my life. The house was quiet, the guests long gone, my son and his wife likely sleeping the fitful sleep of the casually cruel. But I was wide awake. The profound public insult had not broken me. It had ignited a fire in my soul, a cold, clear, and utterly methodical fury. My heartbreak had turned into a bookkeeper's resolve. He wanted to talk about what was owed? Excellent, let's talk. I went to my old home office, a small, dusty room that had once been my sanctuary, a place of quiet order. It was here that I kept my life's records, a habit ingrained in me from my years as a professional bookkeeper. I unlocked the old metal filing cabinet, its drawers sliding open with a soft, familiar squeak. Inside, nestled in the back, were my personal ledgers. Oh, thick, heavy leather-bound books, their pages filled with my neat, precise script, a chronological history of my financial life, and I now realized a detailed accounting of my son's profound, lifelong dependence on me. I had kept these records out of habit, a need for order, a way to track my own quiet sacrifices. I had never intended for them to be a weapon, but my son, with his cruel, thoughtless words, had just declared war. And these ledgers, these dusty, forgotten books, were my arsenal. I sat down at my old oak desk, the wood cool beneath my trembling hands. For a moment, the sheer weight of the betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. I looked at a framed photo on my desk, a picture of a 5-year-old Marcus, his face beaming, a gap-toothed grin, holding up a small, lopsided clay pot he had made for me for Mother's Day. Where had that boy gone? When had the love in his eyes been replaced by the cold, hard currency of contempt? My heart ached with a grief so profound it was a physical pain. A single tear fell onto the open page of the ledger, a small, dark blot on the clean white paper. Then I took a deep breath. The grieving mother had had her moment. Now the bookkeeper had work to do. I wiped the tear away and picked up my pen. I started with the first ledger, dated 2001, the year Marcus had turned 18. I found the entry for his college tuition. I remembered that day at the bank, the fear, the hope. I pulled out the corresponding file from the cabinet, and there it was. The original loan document for the second mortgage, the canceled checks for each of the 180 payments I had made, a 15-year testament to my sacrifice. As I documented the toll, I remembered his promise. "I won't let you down, Mama." A bitter, humorless smile touched my lips. Then came the next chapter of his life, his entrepreneurial phase. I found the records for his failed tech startup in 2008. I found the wire transfer confirmation, the one that had sent a huge chunk of my retirement savings into the black hole of his vision. I remembered his passion, his excitement, the way he had spoken of changing the world. And I remembered the quiet, shamefaced phone call a year later, the one where he had told me it was all gone. I had not berated him, I had comforted him, and then I had quietly paid off the business debts he had left behind. I entered the full amount of my lost investment into the ledger, a stark six-figure reminder of his first great failure. I worked through the night, a woman possessed. The hours flew by, each turned page a fresh wave of pain, of memory, of a mother's foolish, boundless love. I documented everything. The down payment for the Ansley Park house, a gift I had given them so they could have a stable home for my grandchildren. The 12 years of property tax payments I had secretly covered, a bill that would have otherwise sent them into a financial tailspin, the endless emergency loans for car repairs, for credit card debts, for unexpected expenses that were always the result of their own reckless spending. With each new entry, the total at the bottom of the page grew, a staggering multi-million-dollar testament to a lifetime of my sacrifice and his ingratitude. This wasn't just a few $1,000s here and there. This was his entire adult life, underwritten by me, his freeloader mother. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window, I sat back in my chair, my work complete. The ledger before me was not just a collection of numbers. It was the story of my life, the story of my love, the story of my son's profound, lifelong betrayal. He had reduced our relationship to a transaction. Very well, I had just tallied up the bill. The cruel hypocrisy of his words from Thanksgiving dinner echoed in my mind. Be grateful for what you get. He had no idea what he had gotten. He had no idea the true cost of the life he so carelessly, so arrogantly lived. But he was about to find out. My heartbreak was gone, replaced by a cold, hard, and deeply satisfying sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a creditor. And my son, my ungrateful, entitled son, was about to find out that his debt to me was far greater than he could ever possibly imagine. And I, his mother, the bookkeeper, was about to call it due. For the next few weeks, I worked in secret, a quiet, methodical ghost in the house of my own silent funding. I continued to play the part of the wounded, slightly confused old woman, my silence and compliance a perfect camouflage for the storm I was about to unleash. While Marcus and Tiffany moved through their lives with a renewed sense of arrogant ownership, their Thanksgiving cruelty having seemingly solidified their dominance, I was in my small office, transforming my ledger of pain into a weapon of devastating precision. It was not enough to simply have the numbers. I knew that a direct emotional confrontation would be useless. They would deny, they would gaslight, they would twist my grief into a performance of senility. No, my revenge had to be professional. It had to be undeniable. It had to be presented in a format they, with their superficial understanding of success, would be forced to respect. I decided to create a master invoice. Using my old bookkeeping software, a program I knew as well as the back of my own hand, I began to design the document. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of cold corporate fury. The letterhead was simple, elegant. B. Holloway and Associates, Estate and Legacy Auditing. I was the sole associate, of course. Then came the line items. I did not just list the amounts, I gave them a narrative, a story of my sacrifice, framed in the cold, hard language of a business transaction. An investment for service rendered and capital invested was the title. It was addressed directly to Mr. Marcus Holloway. The first item was the largest, the most significant. Educational investment, Morehouse College. Class of 2001, full tuition, room and board, principal amount plus 24 years of compounded interest at a conservative 5%. I added a small cutting note in the description, an investment in a future that yielded no returns of gratitude. The second item was for his first major failure, seed capital for world-changing venture, 2008, total loss, full loss of principal investment plus projected market rate returns lost, another massive six-figure number. I added another note, a bailout for a revolution that never materialized. Then came the house, the very stage for my humiliation, capital contribution, real estate acquisition, down payment and associated closing costs, and finally, the ongoing operational costs of his life. Annual property tax subsidy 221120023. 12 years of payments made in full on your behalf to maintain a lifestyle beyond your means. I created a separate invoice for my invisible labor, the years of childcare, of cooking, of cleaning, but I decided to hold that one in reserve. For now, the financial accounting was enough. The numbers alone were a devastating indictment. The grand total at the bottom of the page was a life-altering, multi-million-dollar sum. It was a debt so immense, so comprehensive, that I knew it would shatter his entire sense of self, his entire self-made narrative. But the numbers were not enough. I needed proof. I spent days in my dusty attic sifting through 40 years of meticulously kept records. I found it all. The canceled checks for his tuition payments, the original loan documents for the second mortgage I had taken out on my own home to fund his education, the wire transfer confirmation for his failed startup. Every single property tax receipt, I made crisp, clean copies of every single document, a thick, undeniable paper trail of his dependents. I compiled it all into a single, intimidatingly thick presentation binder. The master invoice was the cover sheet, followed by page after page of irrefutable proof. It was no longer a family dispute. It was a legal and financial case file, and it was airtight. I waited for the perfect moment to serve it. It came, as I knew it would, about a month after Thanksgiving. Marcus and Tiffany, having weathered another of their self-inflicted financial crises, came to me, their faces a mask of practiced concern. They needed another loan. A small one, they said, just to tide them over until a big commission check came in. They were so arrogant, so certain of my endless, unconditional support that they walked right into my trap. They sat on my sofa, the one I had paid for, in the house I had helped them buy, and they made their pathetic, entitled plea. I listened patiently, my expression a mask of grandmotherly sympathy. When they were finished, I just nodded slowly. "I see," I said. "It sounds like you are in a difficult position." I stood up. "Let me see what I can do. I have some paperwork of my own I'd like to discuss with you." I went to my office and retrieved the binder, the master invoice, my weapon. I walked back into the living room and placed it on the coffee table between us with a soft, final thud. The reckoning was about to begin. The moment I placed the thick black binder on the coffee table, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Marcus and Tiffany exchanged a quick, confused glance. They had been expecting me to return from my office with my checkbook, with a look of weary resignation on my face, ready to once again bail them out of their self-inflicted financial mess. They were not prepared for a formal presentation. "What's this, Mom?" Marcus asked, his voice holding a note of impatient condescension. "More of your old household budgets?" "Not exactly, son," I replied, my voice calm, my hands steady as I opened the binder. "This is a new budget. A retroactive one. I believe it's time we had a full and transparent accounting of our family's finances." I turned the binder around so they could see the cover page. I had designed it myself with a simple, elegant, and chillingly corporate font. "Master in view, services rendered and capital invested, 2001 present. Bill 2, Mr. Marcus Holloway, from Beatrice Holloway." They stared at it, their faces a mask of baffled disbelief. "An invoice?" Tiffany finally said, her laugh a short, ugly, humorless bark. "What on earth is this? Be a joke?" "I assure you, Tiffany," I said, my gaze not leaving my son's face, "this is no joke. Marcus," I continued, my voice as cool and as professional as if I were addressing a client. "At our Thanksgiving dinner last month, you made it very clear that you view our relationship in transactional terms. You informed me that as a freeloader who does not pay the bills, my contributions to this household are worthless. I have simply taken you at your word, and I have prepared a detailed accounting of all my past worthless contributions. I thought it was time we settled the account." I then proceeded to walk them through it, line by devastating, soul-crushing line. My voice was a calm, dispassionate monotone, the voice of a bookkeeper presenting her final audit. "First," I began, tapping the top line item, "we have your education, the full cost of your 4-year degree from Morehouse College, a debt I carried for 15 years. Your promise was, 'I won't let you down, Mama.' This line item represents that promise with interest." I stated the 7-figure sum. Marcus's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Second," I continued, turning the page, "we have the seed capital I invested in your failed technology startup. You called it a revolution. It seems the only thing it revolutionized was my retirement account. The invoice reflects the full loss of my principal investment. Another massive six-figure number. Tiffany let out a small strangled gasp. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "That was a business loss. It was a loss of my life savings, my dear," I replied without looking at her. "A loss I absorbed so my son wouldn't have to." "Third," I said, my gaze as sharp as a shard of glass, "we have the down payment for this very house. A stable foundation, I believe I called it. It seems the foundation was stable, but the occupants were not." "That was a gift, Mom." Marcus finally found his voice, a weak, sputtering thing. "You can't bill me for a gift." "Can't I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. "You seem to believe that my presence here, my food, my very warmth is not a gift, but a service for which I should be billed. I am simply applying your own logic, son. It seems only fair." I turned to the final, most damning section, and finally I said, "We have the 12 years of property tax payments on this house that I have quietly, secretly covered for you year after year so you could afford your lavish vacations and your wife could afford her designer handbags." I slid the stack of copied canceled checks across the table, each one a testament to his long-term parasitic dependence. I let them look at the grand total at the bottom of the page. A multi-million-dollar sum that represented the true staggering cost of his self-made life. Their world, their entire sense of self, was unraveling before my very eyes. Marcus just stared at the paper, his face ashen, his hands shaking. Tiffany was weeping, quiet, hysterical sobs of a woman who has just seen her entire fraudulent world burn to the ground. You kept records?" Marcus whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "All this time? You kept records?" "Of course I did, son," I replied softly. "I'm a bookkeeper. It's what I do. I keep track of what is given and what is owed." I stood up then. The meeting concluded. "You came to me today asking for another loan," I said, my voice quiet but final. "The answer is no. The Bank of Mom is permanently closed. In fact," I added, looking at the immense, life-altering sum on the invoice before them, "I believe it is you who owes me." I left them there in my living room with my invoice, with the undeniable documented proof that their entire successful life was a fiction. A life built on a mountain of debt to the very woman they had so cruelly, so casually scorned. The reckoning had been served, and it was more devastating than they could have ever possibly imagined. The aftermath of my master invoice presentation was a quiet, catastrophic implosion. There was no screaming, no dramatic confrontation after that initial, devastating meeting. There was only a heavy, defeated silence that filled the beautiful Ansley Park house like a thick, suffocating fog. Marcus and Tiffany were broken, not by my anger, but by the cold, hard, undeniable truth of their own profound, lifelong dependence. They could not possibly repay the debt, of course. The multi-million-dollar sum was a monument to their own folly, a number so large it was almost absurd. But its purpose was not to be repaid. Its purpose was to be a weapon, a tool of leverage, the final, unassailable proof of their moral and financial bankruptcy. They knew they were trapped. A few days after our meeting, I had my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, send them a formal letter. It stated that while I had no intention of pursuing the full, staggering debt in court, my continued forbearance was conditional. The condition was simple. They would agree to my terms for the future of the family's primary asset, the house, or I would proceed with a lawsuit that would not only publicly expose their decades of financial exploitation, but would also likely result in a judgment that would leave them in debt for the rest of their lives. They had no choice but to agree. My terms were not about vengeance, they were about justice and about protecting the future of my grandchildren from the recklessness of their own parents. The legal agreement they were forced to sign was my final, quiet victory. It stipulated that they were to immediately put the Ansley Park house on the market. The proceeds from the sale were to be divided. A portion would go to me, a partial repayment of my initial down payment contribution. But the lion's share, the vast majority of the equity they had so arrogantly considered their own, was to be placed into a new, ironclad, professionally managed trust. This trust, the Holloway Grandchildren's Legacy Fund, was my masterpiece. Its sole beneficiaries were my grandchildren, their funds to be used exclusively for their education, their health, and a down payment on their own first homes when they came of age. And the most important clause, the one that was the heart of my entire revenge, was the one that named the trustee. My son, Marcus, and his wife, Tiffany, were explicitly, legally, and irrevocably barred from ever acting as trustees, from ever having any control, any access, any say over their own children's fortune. They had proven themselves to be profoundly unfit guardians of a legacy. The sale of the house was a quiet, humiliating affair for them. They were forced to pack up their lives, to leave the beautiful, historic home they had so proudly flaunted, their social standing and their affluent neighborhood destroyed. I watched from a distance as they moved into a small, modest rental apartment, their lavish lifestyle a thing of the past. I overheard them having an explosive argument while packing boxes in the garage, their voices sharp with blame and recrimination. "This is your fault, Marcus," Tiffany had shrieked. "Your mother. You should have controlled her." He had just replied, his voice a low, defeated growl. "How do you control a woman who has a receipt for your entire life?" The final scene of our long, painful story was not a confrontation, but a quiet, legal meeting at my lawyer's office. I was there to sign the final papers establishing the trust for my grandchildren. Marcus was there, as required by the court, to sign the final document acknowledging the terms of the settlement. He looked diminished. The old, arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, hollowed-out shame. He did not look at me. He just signed the papers where the lawyer indicated his signature, a testament to his absolute defeat. As he was leaving, I spoke to him one last time. My voice was not angry, not triumphant. It was just quiet. "You called me a freeloader, Marcus," I said softly. "You told me to be grateful for what you got." I paused, letting my words sink in. "I hope, for your children's sake, that you have finally learned the difference between a price tag and true value. That is the only inheritance I have left to give you." He just nodded, a single jerky movement, and walked out of the office, out of my life. I now live a quiet life, my own finances secure, my heart at peace. My revenge was not in ruining my son, but in saving my grandchildren. In my final meeting with my lawyer, my voice was full of a new power and purpose as I dictated the terms of their legacy, ensuring it would be a fortress protected from their parents' greed forever. I had ensured that the legacy of our family, a legacy of hard work and quiet dignity, would be passed on to a generation that might, I pray, finally understand its worth. I had been called a freeloader in the house I had paid for. But in the end, I had presented my son with a bill for his entire life, and it was a debt he would spend the rest of his own life silently, shamefully repaying.